Good afternoon, Coach. Thanks for joining us here today. Why don't we start by just talking a little bit about where you coach?
I coach in Dutchess County, all the way to the north, and it's a very small school district, so we have a small student-athlete population.
Very nice. And how many years have you coached there?
So I'll be going into my second year of coaching there. It's a merged sport, so I previously coached at one of the other schools that the sport is merged with.
Gotcha. And what sport is this?
I primarily coach soccer, but I have coached softball
Okay.
as well as track.
All right. So, well versed. Can we talk a little bit about the demographics of the school?
So we have a large population of students that are not American citizens or are first generation born in the United States. So a lot of students whose first language is not English, as well as families who do not speak English. And I would say we have a pretty economically diverse population.
Gotcha. And now we're going to get to this later in the interview, but do you find that challenging at times having maybe people who English is not their primary language?
I think it definitely makes things a little bit more interesting, but making information accessible is sometimes challenging if you don't speak a language other than English.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And just to let you know, this interview is going to be based on sportsmanship and gamesmanship, and we're going to touch a little bit on diversity. And all answers are going to be confidential in this.
Even though it's on YouTube? Just clarifying.
Yeah, we'll make it private.
Okay.
So can you just give us 1 to 2 highlights of coaching?
Like things that I
Yeah, maybe some things that you're really proud of, maybe some tougher moments that you've had, but just 2 things off the top of your head that maybe stick out.
I would say just a highlight was just coming out of my first season as a head varsity coach, and it being a merged sport and seeing the girls get along, that could be rival schools. I think that's definitely a highlight. I would also say I'm fortunate enough to have a very good relationship with my assistant coach, so that's definitely a highlight of the season. Like I enjoy collaborating in the coaching realm.
Yeah, I always think that makes it a little bit easier when you get along with the people you work with. So is sportsmanship an important part of your coaching philosophy, and why?
Yeah, I definitely think sportsmanship is an important part of my coaching philosophy. I wouldn't say that it is super central, because I think good sportsmanship comes from just a emphasis on respect at a very base level. But yeah, I think sportsmanship is definitely in there.
Awesome, thank you. What one event regarding good sportsmanship sticks out to you the most from your experiences?
I would say, while this wasn't against a traditional opponent in a game sense, during fitness testing, I had, a student athlete who finished first, a timed mile way ahead of the rest of the team, and rather than like stopping and even cheering from the sideline, she went back and finished running with the slowest person on the team, which I think that shows great sportsmanship, because I think fitness testing can be very competitive and cutthroat, especially when it typically aligns with playing time and what the coaches see. So I think that was a good example.
Yeah, it's always awesome to see kids helping other kids. Have you ever had any issues with players where they have been reprimanded regarding unsportsmanlike conduct, either during a practice or during a game?
Definitely after a game. There have been instances where, just like anyone, we might have experienced a referee that doesn't put calls out that we necessarily agree with or we think are correct. And I just don't like the kids to voice that after a game. I think that's kind of something that can be like accepted. It's not something that is in our power to change, but hearing kids complain about it in a way that others can hear, I don't think reflects well on the program or the team itself. So yeah, I've definitely had issues with that in the past.
yeah, I think sometimes it comes off as the kids making excuses. But off the top of your head, do you remember at any point seeing maybe a player of yours who acted in an unsportsmanlike way and either got called for it or did not get called for it, but you saw it and it's something that's not something that you want your program exemplifying?
Yeah, I think on the field, being that soccer's a contact sport, I've had instances where I've like, say, pulled defenders off the field and given them a break, talked to them, and then put them back in, but put them back in on a different side of the field because I can just see that tensions are brewing, that calls are getting, or things are getting chippy, I should say. Whereas, maybe they haven't been carded yet, but I can see that their intent is no longer to say just defend the ball. But it is to like, make an illegal tackle as retaliation. So there have definitely been times where I've made substitution decisions based on that.
Gotcha. So our next question is, have you ever had to deal with any unsportsmanlike issues on your teams and where some consequences and penalties? We kind of just addressed that. Has there ever been any other situations where maybe a kid wasn't being very sportsmanship and they received maybe a different penalty than just playing time?
I don't know that I've experienced it to such a degree that it would be warranted to say like speak with an athletic director or a parent, but I would imagine in situations where it is more extreme, like, I mean, one thing that I can think of is like, kids are so involved on social media, and I could see like something like that happening where, it would be necessary to say like, you're not representing our school or our program in a positive light. It's unsportsmanlike conduct, even if it's off the field and away from the team. And I could see that would be cause for having to have a greater conversation and bring in other parties.
Gotcha. Thanks for elaborating on that. Do you consider gamesmanship as part of coaching strategy? And if so, can you give us an example of sometimes that maybe you use it?
I think this is really controversial, but I would say yes, it is part of coaching strategy. I think rules are there for a reason, and I certainly respect it, but I do think that there are certain things that we do, not necessarily to work around the rules, but to say, okay, here are the rules. We know we need to follow the rules, but what is in our control? So I know one thing that comes to mind is, you're up in a game, let's say, and it's a close game. We know that there are, rules against delay of game, but we do have the opportunity to sub every time the ball goes out. So I think in that sense, yeah, you could say, okay, you're delaying the game. However, at the same time, there are rules that say, the clock doesn't stop after a certain amount of time or after a certain number of goals are scored. Sometimes those rules change, but there are things in place to kind of protect against that. So I do think that is a, somewhat strategic. I think at the same time, some people might argue that if you're up by a lot of goals, that it's insulting to say, or unsportsmanlike to, play keep away against the other team. But I also think, some people would say that is the right thing to do, because it would be wrong to say just rally up the score excessively. So, I think there's two sides to everything, and it kind of just depends on your intent.
Gotcha. Do you consider gamesmanship as taking advantage of the rules, or would you consider it more so cheating?
I don't know if I would say it's either. I think it's, if you're knowledgeable about the rules, I think it's kind of back to what I said before. You're doing what is in your control as a coach. So if it's not in your control to shorten the game, but it is in your control to make subbing decisions, then you do that. I think, it's kind of part of coaching. It would be similarly like I could take out all of my forwards and play with 8 defenders, right? Somebody might say that that's manipulating the game because, should you really have offensive players? Yeah, probably. That's in a typical structure or lineup. But is there a rule against it? There's no rule against it.
Now, to build on that, would you consider that ethical? Even though...
Okay.
Even though it may be well within the rules and not considered cheating whatsoever, does that still make it ethical? And I'll give you the example that you kind of used before,
Yeah.
of knowingly shortening the game and subbing after a dead ball, where you know you're not necessarily subbing for the purpose of getting the best players in there. You're subbing more so for the purpose of trying to buy time, for your team to, less time for the opponent's team to try and score. So,
Mm.
would you, even though yes, you are not cheating, would you say that that is ethical to do?
I think it is. And I guess my rationale behind it is you can only sub when the ball goes out of bounds.
Mm-hmm.
So even if a player is injured, oftentimes a referee won't notice the injury because they're worried on where the ball is. So kids will kick the ball out intentionally so that they can get a teammate or an opponent who is injured off the field quicker. So I guess that you could also say that's a manipulation of the rules. Like, oh, we're gonna, but I think that's done positively. So I think it kind of goes back to this understanding of these are the rules. If you're knowledgeable of the rules, then right, you're going to be more successful.
So now, no, so I agree. But would you consider it ethical for your team to then kick out the ball just so you can get a sub?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think again people could have varying opinions on it, but I think it's ethical because I know the rules, right? That's part of the game of coaching is you know.
Okay, fair enough. Do you utilize any positive strategy regarding diversity on your teams?
Yeah, I think so. We try to make a point of doing a lot of team bonding so that we don't have that barrier of, these kids and these kids, or whether that has to do with, background, socioeconomic status, or, what your home district is, because like I said, we are a merged sport. So in terms of team bonding, like we've done things where we do scavenger hunts where like kids are grouped into teams, and I make sure that they're in groups that they're not with all of their friends, but they're with some kids that maybe they don't always spend time with. We do something called Secret Supporter, where at the beginning of the season they're assigned another teammate. Every home game day they write them a positive note and they give them like a goodie bag of kind of treats and stuff that is on the bench for them. So I think that also kind of helps to bridge those, I guess, issues of teenagers being teenagers and not necessarily going out of their way to leave their clique. So I think that helps.
I think that's fantastic. Now, have you ever had any issues with diversity on your team? I know you do a lot of stuff to try and get them together and try and prevent these issues. However, have you ever had any issues regarding diversity on your teams?
I've had issues with a disagreement on importance of being at practice. And I think that because certain information the coach is only privy to, right? The coach might know who has to work that job after school on certain days of the week, or who has to get a sibling off the bus because they don't have another opportunity for childcare, so they're not going to be at practice, or they have to leave practice early because of X, Y, and Z commitment that is really out of their control. I think that's linked to diversity, just in the sense of, again, socioeconomic status, or what your commitments are to your family because of your background. So I think that there's been some disagreement over, like, they shouldn't be on the team, they're not at practice, but again, because not everyone is privy to the information of why they're not at practice, I think that kind of sometimes can cause some rifts.
So now the next question deals with addressing diversity acceptance in your preseason. Now, I know you do a lot of team bonding, but now do you ever mention anything to the kids about the importance of accepting everybody for their different backgrounds or their different this? Now, do you ever specifically speak that with them, or is it more so just a preventive measure and just trying to get them all together and know each other?
I would say it's more a preventative measure.